There's a moment in every thinking person's life when they start to question the script they were handed. Not just the big ideas about heaven or hell, but the subtle, suffocating rules written into the foundation of their identity. Maybe you were told that ambition is dangerous, that pleasure should be feared, that hunger for more is something to be ashamed of. But what if all of that wasn't designed to make you righteous? What if it was designed to make you controllable? Machiavelli, writing centuries ago, saw through this with terrifying clarity. While others praised religion for its moral power, he studied how it worked like a well-oiled machine, one built not for saving souls, but for shaping them into tools. To him, religion was never about spiritual truth. It was about strategy. And its most powerful move, teaching you that your natural desires are a sin. From the time we're children, you're not condemned for doing wrong, you're condemned for wanting what makes you powerful. And the moment you internalize that message, you become easy to rule. If you believe that your desire is evil, then anyone who promises to cleanse you of it becomes your master. That's not spirituality. That's submission disguised as sanctity. But to control entire cultures, you don't need chains when you can convince people to feel guilty for thinking independently. When shame becomes the operating system of a society, it polices itself. People fold their hands, silence their instincts, and punish each other for breaking rules they never agreed to in the first place. It's not just psychological, it's economic, political, and generational. Shame is passed down like inheritance. And those in power, they stay clean while everyone else self-flagellates. When you convince a society that a woman's value depends on whether she's been touched, you've done more than moralize sexuality, you've commodified it. You've made her body a battlefield. And it was enforced with sermons, shame, and silent fear. But the control doesn't end there. Religion's real genius, Machiavelli noted, lies in its use of moral blackmail, the kind that doesn't just scare you into compliance, but convinces you that suffering is sacred. You're not just told what not to do, you're told that if you hurt, if you suffer, if you suppress yourself, you're somehow better for it. You want wealth? That's greed. You want to lead? That's pride. You want revenge for injustice? That's wrath. Every impulse that might make you strong gets recoded as a moral flaw. And what do you get in return? A vague promise. Salvation, maybe. But only after death. Only if you play by the rules. And only if you constantly apologize for being human. That's not faith. That's a brilliant system of psychological traps. You feel bad for wanting. You feel sinful for feeling. They're calculating. They're using the same rules they taught you to follow, as tools to build empires. This isn't a call to burn down belief. It's a call to see it for what it has become when twisted by power. To question not the idea of God, but the systems that claim exclusive access to Him. Because if you don't question who benefits from your guilt, you'll spend your life apologizing for the very things that make you alive. And that, Machiavelli believed, is the most dangerous prison of all, the one you're tricked into building yourself. There's a comforting story we've all been told, that religion brings peace, that faith teaches compassion. That belief in something higher keeps us from tearing each other apart. It's a beautiful idea. But history tells a much darker version of that story, one that Machiavelli, centuries ago, had the courage to say out loud. He watched as kings slaughtered their enemies, as popes raised armies, as empires expanded through rivers of blood, and all of it done not in spite of religion, but with its blessing. Because religion, Machiavelli realized, doesn't stop violence. It sanctifies it. Wars aren't always fought for oil, land, or gold. Sometimes, they're fought for truth. And that's the trick. When a king kills for money, he's a tyrant. But when he kills for God, he becomes a hero. The sword becomes a cross. The conquest becomes a crusade. Machiavelli understood that religion didn't cause war, it justified it. It gave rulers the moral cover they needed to commit atrocities without being questioned. When your violence wears a halo, no one looks too closely at the blood on your hands. Think about the Crusades, often painted as spiritual quests for liberation. In reality, they were massive land grabs. Political campaigns masked in divine rhetoric. Armies marched not to find God but to claim cities, seize resources, and expand influence. But because it was done, in the name of the Lord, it transforms monsters into saints and mass murder into divine will. Popes didn't just preach peace, they orchestrated wars. They crowned emperors, excommunicated dissenters, and played thrones like chessboards. Behind their robes were the sharp minds of political tacticians who understood the ultimate truth of power: people will do anything, kill, torture, burn, enslave, if they believe God wants them to. And it wasn't just the church. Kings and emperors wrapped themselves in scripture, claimed divine right, and weaponized faith to silence opposition. You couldn't challenge the ruler without being labeled a heretic. And heresy, conveniently, was punishable by death. This wasn't spirituality, it was strategy. Religion gave rulers the perfect camouflage. They didn't need to prove they were right. They just needed to convince people they were righteous. And once that illusion was set, once the people believed that God himself was on the side of the crown, no rebellion could rise without being condemned as evil. Like ideas being burned before they could spread. When institutions claim a monopoly on truth, they no longer need armies to dominate, they just need fear. The fear of eternal damnation. The fear of being cast out. The fear of questioning what's been labeled divine. Machiavelli wasn't condemning belief itself. He wasn't attacking the idea of God. What terrified him was how easily faith could be manipulated, how leaders could twist something sacred into something sinister, and how masses would follow, not out of hatred, but out of hope. Because if you believe God is on someone's side, you'll let them do anything. You'll excuse the cruelty, ignore the injustice, justify the war. Not because you're evil, but because you think it's good. That's the danger. Religion, when used as a political tool, doesn't just silence opposition, it silences your conscience. It replaces your moral compass with a script written by someone else. And once you stop questioning, once you stop thinking, you become part of a machine that burns people alive in the name of forgiveness, that poisons dissenters while preaching love, that builds empires through holy war and calls it salvation. This is what Machiavelli saw. And it terrified him, not because he didn't believe in faith, but because he knew that when faith is handed to those who crave power, it doesn't save souls. It destroys them. Not with fire and brimstone, but with silence and ritual. Not with lies, but with the illusion of truth. That's how the greatest violence is committed, not by monsters, but by men who look holy while doing it. There's a kind of guilt that doesn't wait for you to do something wrong. It's already there when you wake up. It whispers to you before you act. Before you speak, sometimes even before you think. It's not tied to any harm you've caused, any lie you've told, or any boundary you've crossed. It simply exists, embedded in your sense of self, quiet, invisible, and constant. That kind of guilt isn't natural. It's programmed. And for centuries, religion has been one of the most effective delivery systems for it. Machiavelli saw this long before psychology gave it a name. He understood that fear alone couldn't maintain power. Fear fades. Laws can be broken. But guilt? Guilt is eternal, if you design it right. Imagine the power in that. To control someone, not just by what they do, but by what they silently feel. That's not guidance. That's surveillance of the soul. This wasn't just guilt over obvious moral wrongs. This was engineered guilt, preemptive guilt. You're told you're wrong before you even begin. You want success. That's pride. You want justice. That's wrath. You crave connection or pleasure. That's lust. So you begin to self-censor, not out of morality, but out of fear that your desires make you unworthy. And once that wiring is in place, no chains are needed. You'll police yourself. You'll kneel without being asked. Over time, that guilt doesn't just live in your mind. It settles deeper. It becomes internalized oppression, the kind you carry like a second skin. You start to doubt your instincts. You hesitate before asserting your needs. You shrink in spaces where you should be standing tall. Not because anyone is punishing you, but because the system taught you to punish yourself. And that's the genius of it. The most effective form of control isn't external. It's when the captive builds the cell and locks the door from the inside. Machiavelli recognized this as one of religion's most dangerous achievements. Because once people believe they are inherently broken, they become dependent. They'll seek forgiveness endlessly. They'll tithe, confess, fast, suffer, hoping to be made whole. But the system is never designed to offer true relief. It's designed to keep you coming back. You feel guilty. You're offered a ritual to relieve it. You perform the ritual, feel a temporary release, then the guilt returns. And the cycle continues. This is the spiritual economy of shame. It's not about belief. It's about transaction. You pay not just with money, but with obedience, silence, and emotional submission. And like any well-run economy, it thrives on scarcity, on the idea that your worth is always just out of reach. That you must earn it through suffering. That forgiveness is a carrot, always dangling, never granted. And those who control the system, they don't just profit from your guilt, they define what counts as guilt in the first place. That's where the strategic use of morality comes in. Because guilt, once weaponized, isn't about ethics. It's about influence. It allows institutions to decide what is good and evil based not on universal truths, but on what keeps them in power. Morality becomes a tool of governance, not growth. It's used to suppress dissent, to shame rebellion, to spiritualize submission. The rules shift depending on who's in charge, but the mechanism stays the same. If you feel bad enough, you'll do as you're told. This is what Machiavelli saw when he studied religion, not just its rituals, but its results. He wasn't cynical about faith itself. He was coldly observant about how belief could be molded into a leash. And guilt, more than fear or violence, was the leash that never snapped. It allowed rulers, preachers, and institutions to build empires out of obedient hearts, hearts that never knew they were being bent. And the scariest part? Most people don't even see it. They think their guilt is their own. They think their shame is sacred. They believe their hesitation makes them humble. But humility without clarity isn't virtue, it's defeat. And in a world where you're taught that your very nature is sinful, standing tall starts to feel like rebellion. But Machiavelli didn't call for rebellion. He called for recognition. For clarity. He knew that once you understand how guilt is being used, you're no longer owned by it. You can stop apologizing for who you are. You can choose to live by a code that you craft, not one that's been carved into you without your consent. Because guilt may be invisible, but its impact is real. It keeps people small. It keeps systems intact. And it keeps power exactly where it's always been, behind the pulpit, above the law, and deep inside the minds of those who were taught to kneel before they could speak. There was a time when religion lived in stone cathedrals, where voices echoed through stained glass and authority wore robes. People knew where the power was, and it had a pulpit. Today, it's different. The rituals have changed, the costumes updated, but the control, it's still here, more subtle, more modern, and in many ways, more dangerous. Because in this new world, religion doesn't need a god. It just needs guilt. And in place of churches, we now have platforms. Machiavelli warned that the most effective form of control isn't enforced, it's believed. And belief today doesn't come from priests or prophets, it comes from influencers, algorithms, and corporate slogans. What he would have called a holy performance is now dressed in tweets, TikToks, and PR campaigns. But the outcome is the same. Obedience. Submission. Fear of exile. We no longer fear damnation, we fear being cancelled. We don't confess in confessionals, we do it publicly. In comment sections, on podcast apologies, in viral Instagram stories. And we don't do it for forgiveness, we do it for image survival. This is soft religion, not based on dogma, but on social pressure. It tells you what to say, what to believe, what to be outraged about, and what to stay silent on. It whispers, this is the right thing, not because it's proven, but because it's trending. And just like traditional religion once dictated what books you could read, what thoughts you could express, or who was saved and damned, now modern platforms dictate morality in real time. One wrong sentence and you're out. Not because you're evil, but because you broke the code. That's what makes cancel culture so eerily familiar to Machiavellian eyes. It's the modern-day Inquisition, public shame as purification. The mechanics haven't changed. In the past, a village would stone you for heresy. Now, strangers who've never met you will flood your comments section, dig through your past, strip away your humanity, and call it justice. It's not about truth. It's about signaling allegiance to the moral tribe. And once you've been branded a heretic, no explanation can save you. Like the accused witches of old, the more you defend yourself, the guiltier you seem. Machiavelli would see this as strategic performance. A new form of virtue signaling where morality is not about action, but appearance. It's not about living ethically. It's about being seen supporting the right causes, using the right hashtags, echoing the right outrage. It's religion as theater, where everyone's a preacher, but no one is listening. Where you're rewarded not for changing lives, but for saying what everyone else is too afraid not to say. And those who dare to question, to resist the tide, to think critically, they're cast out. Marked as immoral, not because they're wrong, but because they're inconvenient. And who benefits from this new religion? Not the people. Not the seekers of truth. It's the corporations. The institutions. The brands. Corporations have become the new churches, adopting moral language as marketing, not because they believe it, but because it sells. They wave the banner of justice, equity, and inclusion, until it no longer benefits their bottom line. They make statements not to lead culture, but to follow it just enough to profit. They are the new temples, slick, scalable, and soulless. But here's the twist Machiavelli would respect: these corporations don't care if you believe. They only care that you behave. As long as you wear the symbols, say the slogans, and stay in line, they'll call you good. Just like rulers of the past, who didn't care if you had faith, only that you knelt at the right time, in the right direction. It was never about God. It was about control through belief. And today, it's the same. Just dressed in pastel logos and social justice merch. This new religion isn't about connection or transformation. It's about conformity. And that's the danger. Because people today believe they've outgrown religion. They think that by leaving the church, they've found freedom. But Machiavelli would smirk. You're still being judged. Still being told what's holy. Only now, it's retweets instead of prayers. Followers instead of salvation. And shame. It's gone digital. So what do you do in a world where control hides behind compassion, where obedience wears the mask of activism, where guilt is monetized and morality is just another filter? They've walked into freedom. No more kneeling, no more guilt, no more priests, no more commandments. But Machiavelli would have warned that just because you've left the church doesn't mean you've escaped its grip. Because the modern world has replaced sacred robes with sleek branding, preachers with influencers, and commandments with curated digital values. The rituals are still there. The submission is still there. Only now, it's dressed as progress. In today's culture, there's a new moral code, but no scripture. A new kind of judgment, but no courtroom. The ancient priests have been replaced by a digital priesthood, algorithm-powered voices that bless the correct talking points and curse anything inconvenient. Not in private, but in public. You post your trauma. You apologize for old mistakes. You announce your healing journey not because it's sincere, but because it's required. And every word is weighed. Not by a god, but by strangers scrolling on a screen. That's the shift. Confession isn't for redemption anymore. It's for attention. And often, it's not even your own voice. It's shaped by what the crowd expects you to say. The old religious rituals at least claim to be between you and the divine. The new ones are between you and the algorithm. Those rules are written by groupthink, enforced by social platforms, and policed by the very people living under them. When fear of hell is replaced by fear of being cancelled. When the need for moral purity is driven not by faith but by fear of public rejection, the machine still works. It just upgraded. In this new system, you're not just following a religion, you're expected to become one. You are the message. You are the brand. Your life becomes the sermon. And whether you realize it or not. Deeply vulnerable, but only in the right way, with the right aesthetics, on the right platform. It's not just about what you believe. It's about how well you present it. But what it often leads to is a kind of performative identity, a life spent curating rather than living. You're taught to turn your values into content, your pain into proof, your growth into graphics. You're no longer just experiencing transformation. You're packaging it. Selling it. Broadcasting it. And somewhere in the process, the line between truth and narrative gets blurred. You start to live for the image of growth instead of the actual growth. And the worst part? Everyone applauds you for it. Machiavelli would have admired the elegance of this modern structure. It no longer needs a pulpit. It just needs a platform. It doesn't need scripture. It just needs a scrollable feed. It doesn't need divine punishment, just collective disapproval. The system doesn't care what you truly believe, as long as you keep signaling the right things. It doesn't care about your soul, only your alignment. And when alignment becomes currency, authenticity becomes expendable. So what do you do in a world like this? You see it. You don't fight it with outrage or obedience. You observe it with clarity. You choose what parts to play and when to walk away. You stop mistaking noise for truth. And most importantly, you don't become a priest in a system you never believed in. You don't make your life a sermon for someone else's approval. You build your own inner code, quiet, strong, unshakable. Because freedom doesn't come from escaping religion. It comes from replacing blind submission with conscious sovereignty. It comes from no longer needing permission to exist, to feel, to think. Machiavelli wasn't offering cynicism. He was offering strategy. He wasn't saying never believe. He was saying believe with eyes open. Understand the theater. Know the script. And then decide if you want to write your own. You weren't born to kneel. That may sound radical, even blasphemous to some, but it's a truth buried beneath centuries of conditioning. From the moment you were old enough to understand rules, saw through this moral theater. He didn't rage against it. He didn't call for rebellion. He simply offered a mirror, one that showed the difference between being good and being used. He knew the most dangerous kind of power wasn't the one that ruled your body. It was the one that ruled your mind. The kind that convinces you to shrink yourself, to obey without questioning. Because when morality becomes an unquestioned truth, something handed to you instead of built from within, it stops being a compass. It becomes a leash. Machiavelli wasn't against morality. He was against its blind use. He believed morality, like any tool, could build or destroy depending on who wielded it, and why. What terrified him wasn't evil. It was the idea that people would accept the illusion of goodness without ever asking who benefits. That we'd chase virtue like a prize, not realizing that we were being domesticated in the process. Because a population that defines itself by guilt, that praises silence and calls it holiness, that punishes instinct and calls it discipline, is a population that will never rise. It will endure, obey, and worship its own chains. And so he taught a different kind of strategy. Not chaos, not cruelty, but discernment. A clarity of mind that doesn't just ask what's right, but asks what's real. He believed the most dangerous man wasn't the one who broke the rules, but the one who understood them better than anyone else and could choose when to play along, when to remain silent, and when to walk away entirely. Discernment over faith. Not because belief is weak, but because belief without understanding is vulnerable. You see it everywhere, people repeating mantras they never questioned, defending moral codes they never chose, collapsing under the weight of guilt they never earned. They're not bad people. They're just trained to believe that worth must be approved. That they must be forgiven for being human. That strength is a threat. That desire is sin. And that freedom comes only after death, if they're lucky. Machiavelli called that delusion for what it is, a masterpiece of control. But here's the twist. He didn't write to destroy religion, or to encourage rebellion for its own sake. He wrote so that the few who were ready, those rare individuals who could look past the illusion, could become something else. Not saints. Not rebels. But sovereign. Free not because they screamed louder, but because they saw the game and stopped mistaking it for reality. And this is where the final lesson comes in. True power doesn't come from faith, tradition, or even rebellion. It comes from clarity. The clarity to know when you're being manipulated. The clarity to know when morality is being used as a weapon. The clarity to stop needing permission to be whole. That clarity doesn't make you loud. It makes you unshakable. You stop reacting. You start deciding. You stop asking for freedom. You build it. That's the kind of power no institution can give you, and none can take away. Because once you own your mind, your values, your direction, you don't need priests, politicians, or approval. You don't need to perform virtue for a crowd that will turn on you the moment you step out of line. You don't need to confess for likes or apologize to be accepted. You stand. To write your own code, to build your own truth. And in a world still obsessed with appearances, still dressing control in virtue, still rewarding obedience disguised as morality. That kind of clarity is dangerous. That kind of clarity makes you untouchable. And that, Machiavelli believed, is the highest power of all.